Hi, I'm Tess Piscatelli, and welcome to another segment of The Edge. Today we are talking about emphasizing mental health in schools because it's such a pressing topic within our community lately. The National Institute of Mental Health found that an estimated 49.5% of adolescents have a mental disorder. Of those adolescents, an estimated 22.2% have a severe impairment. These findings prove that we should be more concerned about our children's and teens' mental health. The emphasis of this will lead to the prevention of violence in schools. School shootings have become alarmingly frequent since the Columbine tragedy in 1999. Children and adolescents' lives are being taken from these mass killings. The terror that strikes everyone's minds when we hear school names like Sandy Hook Elementary and Marjorie Stone Douglas High School is appalling. School shootings and violence have become so common in this day and age, and this should just not be the case. A Tribune Review analysis found that over the past 50 years, there have been nearly 250 school-related shootings across the United States. And the Washington Post has determined through studies that since Columbine, the children that have been impacted from a school shooting grew from 135,000 students to more than 187,000 students. In response to these violent acts, the public has tried to find a solution by saying we need stricter gun control laws or we need to arm our teachers in the classroom. The school's response to this is implementing safety procedures so the students are aware of what to do if a shooting ever does happen. In 2016, the CDC found that nearly 90% of public schools had a written plan for responding to school shootings, and 70% of those schools had drilled their students on the plan. As well as having these procedures known to the children, schools should also place a larger emphasis on being aware of and improving their students' mental health. Approximately half of all lifetime mental health disorders start by the mid-teens, and the onset of all major mental illnesses happen as early as 7 to 11 years old. Most students who are threatening other students are being bullied or threatened themselves. We need to be aware of any conflict involving students to get ahead of the problem before it becomes a bigger issue. School counselors, teachers, psychologists, social workers, and the administration need to be more aware of the mental health of their students. They need to build a trusting relationship with their students so they will have better communication with each other. Now, Peters Township High School has about 1,500 students, and it would be impossible for counselors, administration, and teachers to know about every single student. But they do have knowledge of what's going on in a student's life and should check in on the students. Also, by building a trusting relationship with the students, it'll be more likely for them to come forward if they're worried about one of their peers. A student needs to feel safe around their teachers and counselors in schools and safe to tell them any problems that they are having. Today, I'm here with Shannon Williams, who is the founder of Care Housekeeping and also a mental health professional. Thank you for coming today.
Hi, thank you for having us.
So can you tell a little bit about your profession first?
Sure. Well, my business is it's a housekeeping household support service. It's designed for people who are experiencing mental health, such as mental illness or stress, depression, anxiety, overwhelmed, overworked, the gamut of mental health. Understanding that our physical space is affected when our mental space is affected. My background is in social work. I've been an advocate for gun violence prevention for the past 5 years. Prior to that, I was a behavioral health counselor. Prior to that, life skills facilitator at in a juvenile placement facility prior to that.
A lot. So with your professional opinion, why would you think that a student's mental health is so critical in high school?
Well, mental health overall is important. It's important that we all have language. I really appreciate you censoring that the entire orchestra of the school and the district should be well versed on mental health, but also students should as well. Because when we don't have language for things and we can't say this is what's going on with me, like to other people or ourselves, it comes out in our behavior. there's a thought that the way that we communicate mainly is verbally, and it's not. It's through our behavior. And so when someone is experiencing something, whether they are diagnosed or have not been diagnosed just yet, or if they're experiencing something like trauma due to a really, really bad event, and they don't have language for it and don't realize that they're being affected by whatever's going on with them, then it's coming out in behavior. And we see that a lot in school environments. And when we're talking about young adults, we're talking about dependent populations. So, you all aren't people who can go out and seek out mental health support on your own without your parent, So it's very important that we have the involvement of the schools, of the parents, and the students.
So how can the schools prioritize mental health in their environment?
Well, personally, I believe that mental health should be woven into the curriculum, into the day, and into the dynamic of the school. Not just that we had a workshop on mental health, but there are ways to do that. So in the training of the district employees should be at least have mental health first aid as a training course for them, as well as trauma-informed care, because you don't know whose trauma you're coming up against, and our trauma doesn't get checked at the door. So God forbid if we have someone who's been physically abused or sexually assaulted or bullied and so on and so forth, it's coming into every space that they're in. And sometimes we harm people without realizing that we're harming people. So yeah, definitely in the training, but also in the policies that the district has in relation to mental health and personal space and disability and accessibility. Because if we don't have the proper protections for people who are experiencing things, and also everyone else, again, harm can happen. And then in the design of the curriculum in the classroom, I think it's very important to center that these are safe spaces. What happens in these classrooms stays in these classrooms. What's learned in these classrooms leave, absolutely, but you and your peers should feel safe to exist here, to say what you need to say, to experience your teachers in whatever capacity that you need to, because again, that might be your lightning rod, and that might be the person that will save you. But if you don't feel that way, then someone's life can be lost, or many people's lives can be lost.
Well, how can the school get involved to get that training for their teachers, to get that connection with their students?
Mental Health First Aid is a national organization. The teachers can actually be trained in being facilitators, so they can be trained and then also be trained to be facilitators. So not only are they training each other, but also the community and also the students, and creating that school environment. So they can start
training their community.
Absolutely. Also, trauma-informed care. I don't think that there might be a national organization. I'm not going to misquote that, but there are individual organizations that travel and they do teach this information because it is very important. And there are other things I know there are extracurricular trauma-informed projects like trauma-informed yoga and arts and such that creates that space as well, which are good kind of auxiliary things to add to that. But largely those training tracks tend to be offered in different spaces, and they are accessible.
Okay, so why do you think that teachers aren't trained in all these fields yet, if it is so important?
Mental health is a space that we just don't know well. It's a space that we're starting to get familiar with and starting to acknowledge at all. Me being a Black woman, in Black culture, we don't acknowledge mental health, period. And so I'm a person who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder 3 years ago. I've known that there's been something different about me since I was 8. And I've checked in with my mother several times and so look, hey, something's different here. And she would say, you're dramatic and you're just being extra or whatever. And it took for me to seek out on my own as an adult at 26. And originally I thought that there was something physically wrong with me because mental health just wasn't something I would even think about naturally. And I thought I had a thyroid issue and I thought my hormones were off, and I went to see my PCP and she said everything was fine, and she referred me to a therapist, and then he referred me to a psychiatrist, and then I was diagnosed. But 26 years of age, and I've been living with bipolar disorder. I haven't been diagnosed until 3 years ago.
So you took it upon yourself to go and figure things out. Right.
But again, I had to be an adult to do that because I've tried to have that conversation with my mother without knowing that that's the conversation that I needed to have. And it wasn't there. Yeah. So to your question, I just don't think that we as a society, have a clearer understanding of how important mental health is and how intricate it is, and how it affects every part of our lives. So I think we're just catching up right now.
Yeah. So do you think there's one mental health disorder that would go over another, or do you think they all are?
What do you mean by go over?
Like, I don't know, and more important than the other. Like, they should place more emphasis on that if a student is having one of those.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
For one thing, like a person can be diagnosed with something, like two people can be diagnosed, have the same diagnosis, and it could exist completely differently. Like, so I'm diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but it's not the same as my friend who has the same diagnosis. There's 4 categories of bipolar disorder. It's 1, 2, cyclonic, and unspecified.
Yeah.
And I'm unspecified. But again, it looks different on me than it will on other people. And so when we talk about categorizing mental health, we do not know all of the factors that make up a person's physical experience and mental experiences. And
so it affects them all differently.
Absolutely. I mean, just like anything else, bullying affects some people one way and different in another.
So why do schools then, I know they don't get involved with it because they don't know a lot about it, but so for violence, they place a higher emphasis on getting security more in the schools. Do you think that's like backed by they don't really want to get involved with mental health?
I don't think anyone doesn't want to get involved with whatever will make things better. But again, I think it's a lack of knowledge. And we know policing, we know public safety. And I think because we don't know mental health, like our drawback is, our reaction is always going to be public safety and, more policing, more, tighter locks or whatever it is that they're doing now. So I don't think that anyone's against it. I just don't think that the understanding is there and the support.
So then I also read that there was a mental health act that came out in 2017 for emphasizing mental health in schools more, but it was only introduced, I think, to the House maybe. And why do you think schools still haven't, if even like that was introduced?
I'm not familiar with the bill, so I can't speak on that specifically. But I mean, as far as like the process of laws being introduced and policy being supported, like I said, I was an advocate for about 5 years, and it just depends on what our social climate looks like and what our legislators looks like. And so if we have across the board legislators who are supporting it, and I mean like openly supporting a bill or whatever it is, then you'll see that, and you'll see that dynamic change because they'll be open and vocal about it. But if it's kind of like, well, we'll pass it and we don't, like, it's kind of like close, then you might see some support in others. But if it's only been introduced, it's not even far enough along for us to even see what's going to happen with it. And again, I haven't seen the bill, so I don't know what's in it and what some folks might see as being problematic and otherwise. So.
Okay. I think this is all the time we have for just this portion of this show, and we'll come back after this commercial. And we're back to continue discussing mental health with Shannon Williams. So, to get more into like the violent side of things, why would you think that males tend to commit more violence than females?
If I'm able to infer, I would say because socially it's acceptable for men and boys to act out violently, and that's kind of how we characterize our men and our boys. Our toys are geared towards like guns and physical activity, and the idea of our boys and our men having any like being in touch with their feelings or emotions or mental health is just completely out. So like it's acceptable for them to act out violently. It's acceptable for them to fight and do all of those things. It is not acceptable for boys to cry or feel hurt, or express hurt,
like females are
exactly
socially allowed to do.
Exactly. Girls are allowed to do those things. And, violence with girls just looks differently. But again, it's socially acceptable for our boys to act out in such violent ways. And especially because now, like, our access to guns it has increased over the years. You know, it's not the same.
Yeah.
Over the past 20 years, like our restrictions on being able to purchase guns, or at least like the hurdles you have to jump over to be able to purchase a gun, has been diminished more and more and more. And as that happens, gun sales and gun purchases increase more and more and more, especially over the last 8 years or so. And so, you know, the gun violence that we see, like, you know, it definitely correlates to like how many guns are in circulation as well.
Yeah. So do you think schools should be more concerned about their males, or no?
No, not more concerned about, because again, violence looks different from boys to girls, and that's not to discredit the type of violence that girls experience and also exhibit, you know, in their spaces as well. And when violence starts, unless there's intervention, it's going to keep passing around this energy, and it's going to pass around, and it may end up being, you know, someone being shot or hurt or killed, or other things that are bad as well. So across the board, we should be focusing on mental health for boys and girls, but I think we should understand what that looks like from boys to girls.
Yeah. So do you believe that schools should have mental health screenings at the beginning of the year for their? Absolutely. How would they go about doing that? Would they have to get a psychologist or someone like that in? You
would definitely need a clinician. Clinicians are the only ones who can, you know, diagnose and read those appropriately. I think that is important in most, if not all, spaces. And I may be biased of that, but I think it's always helpful to know where someone is, and especially, you know, if we get into the space of trauma. You don't know what someone's bringing in the door, and they may not even know what they're bringing in the door. So to be able to kind of like grab that and develop language for that, you know, and take a more of an offensive approach instead of a defensive approach, we can stop a lot of things, and also you can help someone who's already hurting, you know. Yeah.
So after the like psychologists say they like diagnose them with something, but they still need help throughout like the year, how could a guidance counselor talk to them about like their trauma and what they've experienced?
Well, in the perfect world, our guidance counselors will be trained in that, in trauma-informed care. So those conversations are kind of built into that, knowing, you know, what language to use, and how to process and navigate those spaces. And if need be, it's important to have like community supports as well. There are plenty of programs that exist who help in you know, mental health spaces. It's a matter of like seeking them out. But you know, if there is a student who is experiencing trauma or mental health and the school itself can't provide it, then you know there are options of like community and national and state supports that can come and help, you know, with that process.
So how can the community, like what types of organizations are there for them to get involved in?
Well, there are plenty of independent psychiatrists and therapists and social workers. I'm from Pittsburgh, so my space is Pittsburgh, and I know those organizations regionally, but there's an organization, it's called A Peace of Mind, which is attached to A Vision Towards Peace. A Vision Towards Peace is a therapy service, and A Peace of Mind is a community-based service that focuses on therapeutic and healing practices and activities. So that's one avenue. There's a grieving and support service, I believe by Highmark, and I cannot think of the name of it, but it's for children and adolescents who experience loss or death, and to help with like, you know, our kids and our young adults to process that. Cannot think of the name of it, but I know it's in downtown Pittsburgh, and it is by Highmark. Yeah, and then there's a lot of things.
So how can a community's attention then increase like the emphasis of mental health within the community?
Can you
elaborate more? How can like the increased attention on mental health improve it?
Oh, awesome. That's a really good one. So again, like when we have language for things, that makes them real. Yeah. And so when the things that already exist in us are now acknowledged and we're aware of them, then we can like navigate our space more in a more healthy manner, you know. Yeah. And so before I was diagnosed, I thought this is the way that I was supposed to be, and this is the way I had to exist in space. But you know, when I'm depressed or on a downswing is what I call it, I can't physically be in space with people. Like and like public speaking, it's violent and it hurts. It physically hurts me, and I had to know that, because before I knew that, and I knew that this was a symptom of where I was mentally and emotionally. emotionally, I just forced myself into those spaces, which would cause anxiety, which would spiral into other things. So a more informed community with all things, a more informed community just will operate better, and safer and more healthy.
Yeah. So I know guidance counselors are trained and the community can come together and do that, but how can I as a student be more informed about mental health?
Well, the great thing about being a student is that y'all have all the time, all the time in the world. So engaging with your school. So if your school takes an interest in mental health, then engaging with them in those processes is always a good start. You all can always seek out the organizations, the activities, all of the great things, and bring them into your space, but also being accountable to one another. So when you see someone struggling, or if you think that they might be struggling, or if their behaviors shift a little bit, then to, as their peer and as their friend, to go up to them in a safe way and in a safe space and say, are you okay? And that goes such a long way, especially if it's a person that doesn't have the support at home or anywhere else, or feels like that they don't have the support anywhere else, to have someone reach out and say, I see you. It makes all the difference.
So how can I approach that person? What would be a good way?
Depending on your relationship, I think is important.
What if you're not good friends with them?
If you're not good friends with them, then I think you can always go up to someone and say hey, I feel like there's something different about you, or something might be going on, and I just want to let you know that I see you and I'm concerned, and if I can do anything to help, I'd like to do so. And depending on how they respond, which they might say no, I'm fine, and keep going, and that's fine. You can't force anybody to be in a space with you if they're not ready or comfortable, and that's perfectly okay. But making yourself available, and even if they do shut you down, making sure that they know that you're still available. That my position didn't change just because you don't want to be here with me. If you ever do, I'll still be here, and I still see you. And again, it's creating a safe environment for someone to know that this person isn't out to get me, isn't trying to trick me into anything, but they actually care about my well-being, and eventually they may come to you, or immediately they might come to you, but it does make a difference.
What if you're better friends with them? I know they're probably more comfortable with you, but what if they're still shying away from that?
Same thing. Again, you can't force anybody. You can't force anybody into a space that they're not comfortable with.
Should you seek out their parents or anything?
No.
No?
No.
Why not?
So confidentiality is really, really important.
Okay.
Really important. And because you don't know what's going on, you don't know who's involved, you don't know what their parameters are, what they want shared or disclosed, the last thing you want to do is make an assumption that we should get these people involved, especially if they're already involved and they're on the harm side of it. So it's very important to always prioritize this person's confidentiality and their willingness and their comfortability with who they want in that space with them.
Okay, what about, could I tell a teacher or a guidance counselor?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
It's very, very difficult, and being a social worker, that's always the hard thing, because you want to but I want to include the family and the friends.
Yeah.
But you can't do that. You can't.
Okay.
It's up to them. It is totally 100% up to them, unless you feel like their lives are in danger, or someone else's lives are in danger.
Okay.
So if it's a situation where you feel like they might be suicidal, then you have to tell somebody. Or if you feel like they might hurt somebody else, then you have to tell somebody. Because the last thing you want to think and have on your spirit and on your heart is that I could have stopped that. I saw that.
Yeah. So how could a student go get help? Because like you said, you couldn't go get help without your parents whenever you were little. And so how could I go get help?
So what's great now is that because there is more of an emphasis in interest in mental health and acknowledgement of mental health, that you all have more access than I had. And so, if your school is an environment where they provide those spaces, your guidance counselor, your school nurse, or whomever it might be, if you don't have the supports at home, then those folks can be that. If there are community organizations that exist, being well abreast of, and having that information in the school too, to make sure that everybody knows that if you don't have it at home and you can't get it at school, that this organization exists. But also creating those spaces, those safe spaces with each other, because sometimes peer support goes a long way. And in the interim, before, you're able to get, whatever professional help if it's needed. Then it's good to have some sort of support in those spaces, in those gaps.
Yeah. So you can get that all without, like, your parents even knowing, or?
You can. Yeah, you can mostly.
Okay. So you just reach out to all of those organizations and they will help you. How can they help you?
It depends on the organization and depends on the need. The need is broad, which is why it's important to know like what exists in your physical location, and also what exists in your city, your state, and federally. Like what do you have access to, and what does your school and your district have access to, and making that information available. Accessibility is difficult sometimes, and sometimes like the information is there and the resource is there, but I don't know it's there or I can't get to it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today.
Awesome.
It was great talking to you.
Likewise.
And I love talking about this important issue. Mental health needs to be emphasized in schools to have a lasting impact on students and preventing violence. We need to communicate more with each other to understand what someone is going through and what we can do to help them. Thank you for tuning in today, and come back next time for another segment of The Edge.